Okay. So, why don't we just have a little brainstorming session here? What do you comrades out there know about the dictatorship of the proletariat? Let's go straight to the place. Let's go up to the painting studio. There we go. Alright. Wonder, how can I make a straight line here? Or there's some sort of line tool, right? Come on now. Okay. Wait, let's go back. Wanna undo. There. Undo egg. Okay. It's the deep TOP. Does anybody know what this is? What is the DTOP? And additionally, I want to know who in the chat can name some features of the DTOP. Oh, wait. Hold on, I gotta fix it. Here, wait. Can I cut it out? No. Larry spelling. Hold on. DOTP. Okay, who knows what that is? What if I put it like this instead? Here. What if I made it? There. Now what is it? Dep- Department of Transportation penis. No. Wrong, Comradski. You get a timeout. I'm just kidding. Dirty old toilet paper. Meg gets a mute. Anyone else? Tribal something. Oh my goodness. Comradski definitely gets a mute. Okay, how about a clue? A clue is that Marx wrote about this. It stands for something. I'll start writing it. Look. Mana's close. If I finish writing this, I'm gonna be very, very upset with you all. There we go. Of the Meg got it. Goodness gracious. Look, I know I spelled it wrong at first, but come on now. Okay, cool. So you all know what it is then. So what is the dictatorship of the proletariat then? Do we know that? Any chat want to give us some opinions on what is the DTOP? What is the dictatorship of the proletariat? DOTP. Anybody? Anybody? Have you been taking notes? It's when the people dictate how the government work. Okay, hold on. So we have when people determine how the government works. I'm gonna hide this for myself. Wait. It's when society is governed according to the class interests of the proletariat. It's the leadership structure of the people. Okay. And engaged in the action of suppression of the bourgeoisie as a class. Excellent. And it's when we seize the means of production and hold direct elections. Okay, yes. So, perfect. Excellent. Good answers. So, let me ask you this too. Do you think, in your comrades' opinions, do you think that the dictatorship of the proletariat implies socialism, or do you think that the dictatorship of the proletariat can precede socialism? I always found it strange to find that way because it's like the opposite to what people today refer to as a dictatorship. Yes. But what I would say is, even in the case of like a one-man dictatorship, at the end of the day, it's still a dictatorship of something else, right? That very rarely is it really a one-man dictatorship. It's a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie represented by a single leader. And the class interest that holds sway in those kind of situations is still the interest of the bourgeoisie. So we can think of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie not as being a dictatorship of individuals, but rather it's a dictatorship of the whole class, a dictatorship of the entire bourgeoisie against the proletariat. Okay, so Dorian. Yes, people mostly think a dictatorship is the same thing as autocracy ruled by one person. Okay, cool. Your answer. To me, I think dictatorship of the proletariat is identical to socialism. Okay, I can see that argument. Any comrades have any other thoughts? Do you think? See, the reason I ask that is like, do you think it's possible for us to like? Do you think it's like a chicken and an egg question? I guess. Do you think that? Do you think that we use the mechanism of the dictatorship of the proletariat in order to overthrow like the capitalists, in order to build up socialism? Because like the way I think of it is that in a capitalist society we're building up the job of revolutionaries is to build up dual power, build up revolutionary consciousness, and this becomes sort of like the proto dictatorship of the proletariat. Because like the way I think of it is the revolution, that when the revolution breaks out, the first task, of course, is smashing up the bourgeois state machine as much as is reasonable to do so, and then to replace it with those aspects of dual power that have been built up. And it's at this point when the proletariat, um, seizes control of the state, right? So we think about it like in a sequence. We think of like, okay, pre-revolution. I need the black again here. So we think of pre-revolution, right? And the task to be done, of course, is to build the revolutionary movement. I don't want it to be that big. So let's say pre-revolution. What is to be done? Now, I would say that this part here is I democratic revolution is first, but I think building up dual power, services lacking or insufficient from the state, especially in regards to like marginalized, colonized communities, is our first step. And I think that what this is doing is this is building support for that democratic revolution, right? So in view of that, in view of like of this, let's say go with your democratic revolution. We're building up dual power. We're building up support for and educating people as to the lack of ability to have independence, not just under the capitalist system, but focusing more importantly on the colonial and imperialist system, right? So for using that to gain support for building the mass movement for a democratic revolution. We're going to try and determine at which point a dictatorship of the proletariat has been established, right? So this first, we're building dual power. We're going among the people. We're discovering what they need. We're trying to build up services that are lacking or insufficient from the state in those areas, and using that at the same time, of course, to educate people, using that to gain support for building the mass movement, to prove that like our movement, our organization is fundamentally different, right? And actually is moving on the ground, not just on election days trying to gain promises, but trying to make material differences, which itself helps gain support, which we can use, which gives you the, you know, the platform you then need to educate about how our independence is lacking, is restricted, and how we can never gain it through like some reform of this current system or whatever. Now, settlers, you have to teach your settlers this. For us in First Nations communities, it's obviously that like the way that we have to do this secondary part is going to be different. The allied movement is going to have to be built differently in a way that can support and follow the leadership of colonized people. So we're building the dual power. Then we're using that to gain support for the democratic revolution. And of course, the democratic revolution enables land back. So the democratic revolution, the reason why I say land back to be accelerated is because land back is always going on, right? With the struggle for land back is a constant thing. The democratic revolution simply allows it to be accelerated. It gives us a weapon to fight against the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the power of the bourgeoisie specifically. And the democratic revolution represents a point in which colonialism and the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie becomes weakened, although still greatly connected on the international stage and still very, very dangerous, right? But it's like during probably this time here when you can imagine many of the compradors, many of the settlers are at this point inviting themselves out, if you will. Right? And then however long it takes from this point where we have the democratic revolution, which enables land back to be accelerated, and the lessons learned in that, which then give way to building an even more solid unity towards a socialist society, right? But now, you're cleaning the kitchen? Very nice, very nice. Okay, I'm gonna say so. Land back enables unity to expand, and socialism to emerge as necessity for protecting the gains, or for protecting the Okay, so we don't need to say seek to preserve, we'll just say preserve. There. Okay. So land back enables unity to expand and socialism to merge as the necessity for protecting communalism which working masses preserve. So I tend to take, Dorian, when I'm defining socialism, I tend to take Kwame Nkrumah's definition of socialism. That is, socialism is it's the transition period between capitalism and communism, but is also the necessary. It's defense of communalism in a modern setting, in with modern demographic and with modern technology and science. Let me find the quote for you. So, and that's why I say it enables unity to expand and socialism to emerge, because the socialist system, right, and the necessity for the socialist system, I assert, is through the democratic revolution as we know it on Turtle Island is going to inherently, I think, allow for communalism to emerge again, right? Because this is what many First Nations governments still are sort of bound by. But now, what will end up happening is the need to protect those gains of revolution and the struggle against the counter-revolutionary forces informs people of the need to ensure the defense of communalism, which, and we can take lessons that we've learned from previous socialist experiments to know what we need to do in order to defend that, which is, of course, socialism, the strict control of society by the working class. However, what we define, of course, as working class here is not necessarily the old school Marxist definition by if you're a factory worker or baristas, they're not working class, or, we're not using that old Marxist definition. We want to base ours on what people's ideology is. So, sections of the population that might have been at one time considered lumpen proletariat, or even if we're talking in First Nations and Black communities, sections that would be considered petty bourgeois, can have a more revolutionary outlook than what, like, many of our traditionally working class settlers are. So we need to make sure that we have it defined on this basis. No, of course Marx never would have. No. But I'm just saying, like, the subclasses and stuff that Marx talked about is something that we, like, for example, in Marx's time, he thought that the lumpen proletariat would be equally possible to be a counter-revolutionary force as a revolutionary force. However, I think if we inject intersectional analysis into our Marxism-Leninism, we realize that we have to also take into account the relation of the people to colonialism as well. So, like I say, somebody who would be considered in Marxist terms a lumpen proletariat can have a more proletarian, revolutionary world outlook than somebody who's from your traditional proletarian subclass and have a more revolutionary consciousness because of their relation and experience to colonialism. If that makes sense. There's a really good Kwame Nkrumah quote that I'm going to show you. That's sort of talking about the defensive communalism, like I'm saying here. One of my favorites. Let's see, where is it? This quote right here, I like this one. This is the lesson that we learn through protecting the gains, and also, again, let's not forget that there is still the vanguard element. Like, when we're talking about First Nations and we're talking about the masses needing to learn these lessons, the revolutionaries, like the First Nations scientific socialists and United and the formerly colonized scientific socialists know, like, the direction, right? They have the future in sight. They know the path ahead. But it's necessary for the masses to learn lessons along that road as well, which is why it's important for us to understand that like the democratic revolution has to come first. And I think that the democratic revolution, and I'll get to this in a minute, but I think the democratic revolution is really the point where we can say like the dictatorship of the proletariat goes from being something that you're building up to something that is actually being established, and its authority is being established in society during the struggle for the democratic revolution and during the struggle to then preserve it. And so I think it's still the dictatorship of the proletariat which then builds socialist society itself. And of course, the longest the longest point of this I think is retraining people, because like when we have to think of the socialist society as having different phases, right? And when we've established the socialist system, that that defensive communalism, the guaranteed healthcare and jobs and all of these things, along with the proletarian being in control of the state, then you build up higher phases of socialism as well. And even different countries that exist today, we can see at different phases of the socialist revolution. It'll take several generations, I think. But so here's what Kwame Nkrumah says about socialism here. To be sure, there's a connection between communalism and socialism. Socialism stands to communalism as capitalism stands to slavery. In socialism, the principles underlying communalism are given expression in modern circumstances. Thus, whereas communalism in non-technical society can be laissez-faire, in a technical society where sophisticated means of production are at hand, the situation is different. And I think this is the lesson that will be necessary for many to learn in the masses. And again, if you remember the Taiki Alfred clip that I showed you, even within like native communities and native nations, you have some people that are still very old traditional native ways, and some people who see capitalism and the way Canada exists now is simply just being technological progress. And this is something that we like, as they also want, but many of those people also want independence of the nation as well, right? And sovereignty for their own nation. And so even though this is a contradiction, that is still something that these people have to come to learn through their own experience and through the experience of trying to protect and preserve the gains of like independence, right? So, thus, where communalism in a non technical society can be laissez faire, in a technical society where sophisticated means of production are at hand, the situation is different. For if the underlying principles of communalism are not given correlated expression, class cleavages will arise, which are connected with economic disparities, and thereby with political inequalities. Socialism, therefore, can be and is the defense of the principles of communalism in a modern setting. It is a form of social organization that, guided by the principles underlying communalism, adopts procedures and measures made necessary by demographic and technological developments. Only under socialism can we reliably accumulate the capital we need for our development and also ensure that the gains of investment are applied to the general welfare. And again, this here is a struggle that we will, in our own communities, will, have to struggle to have everybody realize essentially in order to actually realize the socialist system. Even though land back has been accomplished, even though we might be in a serious contest and the destruction of the colonial system is underway, we still will have these independence forces that have allied with us that need to understand the need to decouple from capitalism in other ways as well. Even though there was no like native bourgeoisie, there are still those people with that mindset. Yeah, decouple industry from capitalism. Exactly. So, having said that, having said that, the steps to pre-revolution, the steps to building up the dictatorship of the proletariat are right here. And now, given that, at what point do we think of the dictatorship of the proletariat emerging, right? In this step. And I'll tell you what I think. I think that the dictatorship of the proletariat doesn't necessarily like emerge in any one of these particular stages perfectly. But I think what instead the dictatorship of the proletariat is building up and emerging through this entire course. That the building of dual power is that attempt to prepare for the dictatorship of the proletariat, to prepare the necessary organs of the state that will exist when during the dictatorship of the proletariat. So even though this part right here is obviously pre-dictatorship of the proletariat, what it is doing is laying the foundations necessary and those state organs that will take the place of those that are smashed during the destruction of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? Which is what the democratic revolution is. The democratic revolution is that destruction of the bourgeois state machine. Because democracy, as we know, is a dynamic weapon that arises in the struggle against wealth and power, and especially against the influence of class power. And that's why I say, like, to say that we have bourgeois democracy in the U.S., I think, is a misnomer. You're mistaking a farce for a farce that's disguising fascism for a bourgeois democracy, which we don't even have. The democratic revolution could be thought of as like, there, now we've got a bourgeois democracy, but it's one that has been attained and arrived at through the struggle of First Nations people and black people for independence. Not that it gives power to the bourgeoisie, but that it is the anti-fascist struggle that then allows people, the voiceless, to finally have a voice for the first time. But it's not the emergence of that primitive democracy that Lenin talks about. And through the struggle to hold on to the gains of just those mediocre gains, the democratic revolution and the start of decolonization, that's when masses come to learn the lessons of why we need to continue on and establish socialism. Which is the way it plays out in pretty much every country. You look at DPRK, Cuba, etc. First, they have a democratic constitution that will emerge. And then after several years of struggle to maintain and protect that democratic constitution, you'll see a socialist constitution emerge. So I think that the dictatorship of the proletariat sort of arises organically through this whole process, but I think importantly, it does arrive before socialism. And that the dictatorship of the proletariat is necessary for us to have in order to guarantee the socialist education that we need to re-educate people, right? And that the democratic revolution gets us along the way of that. And the actual establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat allows us to actually radically change education in order to reshape people into socialist-minded people. Okay. So there's that. Now, once we have the dictatorship of the proletariat, what I've talked about this before, but now let's think about like what are some, and we'll put it like this. What are some features of the dictatorship of the proletariat as well? And I'll show you what I mean by that. Such as and like why and if we're trying to determine is the dictatorship of proletariat in power or what stage of its power it's at, we would sort of look at these features. So I think one of those important features is democratic centralism. Okay, so there's democratic centralism. What else? Does is there, would you say, in your comrade's opinion, is there a necessity for a communist party in a dictatorship of the proletariat? Would you say? How about specifically a communist party acting as a vanguard? So, so it needs a vanguard communist party. Yes. A revolutionary scientific socialist organization providing ideological guidance is necessary. And I would also say one determining factor of whether the dictatorship of the proletariat is in power or not, a good way to determine it is that Communist Party, is the Workers' Party constitutionally the ruling party? Right? Let's say another one. Um, in line with it being constitutionally the party, let's say that um let's say other parties cooperate, not compete. That's why I chose this program, Dorian. That's literally the entire reason I chose this program. So other parties cooperate, not compete in a dictatorship of the proletariat. How about property relations? Do you think that certain property relations are necessary to indicate that a dictatorship of the proletariat exists? And if so, what property relations are necessary? How about we say dominance of we won't say state because we'll say dominance of proletarian property laws. Right? Because we can think of countries, we can probably think of, I'm sure you can think of some countries right now that are in the stage of trying to realize this. So I would say this is this here indicates the dictatorship of the proletariat as well, right? The dominance of proletarian property laws. Because this shows that the dictatorship has the proletariat has the authority to enforce their property laws. So this means that private property is not fully abolished. Yes, I think that's possible. I think that's possible. And I think what dominance looks like is that I think the most important thing, at least to ensure that the proletarian control of the state, as I say, but the dominance of proletarian property laws means like the proletarian owns public services that should belong to everybody. Heavy industry, right? Heavy industry should definitely be owned by the government. But again, all of this precluded by the proletarian having ownership of the state itself, right? Because I think the most important feature, because I think one important feature, as Lenin said, do this. There. Okay. Because I think, where is all the power, right? Where is all the power in a bourgeois government? It's in the parliament. Or in the US, it's in the presidential office, I guess, in the case of the US. But if we're talking classic terms, it's in the parliament, right? What do we call it? Okay, there. So I think like when we're talking like China, for example, I want to ask this, comrades in chat. Do you consider China to have a dictatorship of the proletariat? I wanna see where we're at on this. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes. Excellent. So I think China is a good example of a place where this definitely applies, right? China is a place where, although there is some private ownership in the economy, I think what we definitely see in China is China, this the heavy industries and many of the medium industries are owned by the people, right? They're owned by the state. The banks are again owned by the state. And the property that is to be used for real estate is owned again by the state. So I think that's evidence of dominance of proletarian property laws, even though there is still some private ownership in the Chinese economy. I think that China is a good example of this, and Vietnam as well. No, no, Dorian. I think that's a good. And this is why I was actually pointing out what I was, that the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat and whether or not it's in power is really like a very dynamic thing, and we have to sort of look at all of these things and not necessarily it has to meet all of these requirements, but we have to sort of take this evidence and then decide, depending on the features unique to that country as well, whether it does or not. Because actually, this is kind of where I was going, Dorian, is that I think if you look at Venezuela as well, what you see is a dictatorship of the proletariat that has been established, where they are now in the process of establishing that socialist system itself. So I was actually going to use that as an example. I like that you brought that up, Dorian. I think Venezuela is an example where we see perhaps the socialist system has not been quite established yet, although they're very much on their way. They're reshaping property laws. They're reshaping the way that the government serves the people. All of these things, and they're doing so against the interests of the bourgeoisie. So I think Venezuela is a good example of a place where we have seen a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie emerge, and it's in the process of building and consolidating a socialist system. Sort of like in a stage prior to where China is. Because, like, again, I think that, and I think I we could say a communist party, right? But I think that when we talk about a communist party, I don't think it necessarily has to be a Marxist Leninist party. I think a vanguard communist party can also emerge that simply knows that is based on dialectical materialism, but knows the history of its own people, so on and so forth, yet has never read Marxism Leninism. I think that's possible, right? I'm not going to say that that's an impossibility. I think that that is absolutely a possible thing to emerge. And so, like, a vanguard communist party, I think, can emerge in some place like Bolivia that might be led by a party that has some history of critiquing Marxism, at least as it is thought about, as it is taught in their country, right? Because I think because what ends up being like the most important thing to realize is that the people, right, build socialism because it is in their self-interest to build socialism. And when the government sort of allows them the ability to set policies and stuff, they sort of had to have a tendency to go towards that. And now the ruling parties that are fighting for independence and stuff, like the Mass Party or whatever, even if they're not explicitly Marxist Leninists, through their experiences of fighting against colonialism and imperialism, and through even studying and maybe critiquing certain parts of Marxism Leninism, come to have something that is equally scientifically socialist, if you know what I mean, right? Exactly, Blatt. Effectively Marxist it is as it is practiced. If so, it's irrelevant if it calls itself or thinks itself Marxist. Exactly. That's the point I'm making. That because remember, Marx doesn't give us a prescription for socialism and communism. He simply gives us an analysis of existing capitalism and where the forces against it are coming from and headed. Hey, Damien, welcome in. And the important thing that he discovers is that the working class are intrinsically going towards this, and then it's like observes what the working class does in those instances and says, oh well, this is the lessons the working class learned after the last time. And then Lenin built on that and said this was the lesson they should have learned in the Paris Commune, you know. But yeah, I think it can emerge, and this is what Kim Il Sung means by it can emerge in diverse locations. So you see what I mean by I think we do have to somewhat differentiate the dictatorship of the proletariat from socialism. Like, yeah, I think the existence of a socialist society definitely implies a dictatorship of the proletariat. And I think a dictatorship of the proletariat is inherently necessary for socialism. So I agree with it in that sense. On the other hand, I think that the dictatorship of the proletariat emerging as the leading force in society does end up being the thing that precedes actually a socialist society emerging. Because it's the thing that guarantees the ability to reshape the economy, to reshape education, so on and so forth, right? That state power is the thing that allows us to have the authority necessary to reshape it. Because remember, we can like if we could have a revolution now and we change the property relations somehow without changing the state, like forget about how like whether the mechanics of how possible it is or not. Just imagine that if we could somehow um change the property and the state stays the same, how quickly would the state simply enforce new capitalist property laws again? You know what I mean? Like the state is the thing that guarantees the property laws. So the first point is capturing that state. And I do like, and I'm not saying it like because anybody, I just think it's important that we understand specifically the historical sequence of events as they will play out, right? So building up that dual power and stuff like that, that's the moment when we're starting to fight for that dictatorship of the proletariat. And it emerges organically from that moment to the moment when we have established a socialist system. At which point it is even more firmly established, although not invincible, as the USSR demonstrates. And the way it becomes more and more invincible, as DPRK puts it, is by overcoming bureaucracy. And the people's assemblies is just like the Soviets, right? Like, so instead of Comradesky, instead of like in a capitalist society where all the power is in the Senate or all the power is in the parliament or whatever else, all the power in a socialist society is within the various people's assemblies or the Soviets or whatever the country calls them. But it's the smallest unit that exists in provinces, and it's also the largest unit that exists in the central authority, and is the thing with the power to change legislature, to change the laws, and it's the thing which the having all of the parties separate and legally independent of all state organs. It's the thing that basically the Workers' Party protects as being an organ of the people. So, a people's assembly is simply just a parliament that is never made up of any one party. It's an assembly made up of people elected from all various walks of life, mainly trying, of course, focusing on the working class, which is why the smallest unit of people's assemblies ends up being in the workplaces themselves. When people go in and they nominate people that they would like to nominate for having, like, if they want to nominate someone for the Supreme People's Assembly, they go into the workplaces and they nominate people in their workplace People's Assembly. For me, when I saw the people of Venezuela come out to defend their revolution, it demonstrated it's a dictatorship of the proletariat. Absolutely, yes. I love that. I like. I'm gonna put that in here, ABC, because I think that is a very, very important point. Let's say people's. I want to do it like this. People's militant defense of their government can be evidence of the dictatorship of the proletariat. I agree. And when we say people, I want to share a quote with you. Let me find it. There's a really good Kim Jong il quote, because I think we have to also put into context, put into class analysis what we mean when we say the people. Because, like, for example, when we say the people, are the bourgeoisie included in that? The bourgeoisie, they're people. So were they included when we talk about
the books have
the
stuff
masses
recorded
of the
down
people?
all over the years from people. And if we could find a book with someone that had similar problems, just take what they wrote down in the book and make it. Fuck. Sorry, Trina. Take what they wrote down and make it ours.
Okay, here, I get this for you. Okay, check out this quote right here. So this is from Kim Jong il. And he's talking about the phrase, the masses of people. The phrase, the masses of people, reflects a social and class relationship, but it is not merely a class concept. Naturally, the masses of the people consist of different classes and strata. In order to distinguish whether one is a member of the masses of the people or not, his social and class status should be considered, but this must not be regarded as absolute. Man's ideas and behavior are not subject solely to the influence of his social and class status. If he undergoes revolutionary influence and acquires progressive ideas, he can serve the masses of the people, regardless of their social and class status. On the other hand, the opposite can happen, right? The basic criterion for deciding whether one is a member of the masses of the people or not is not one's social and class origin, but one's ideas. The ideological foundation on which can unite people from all walks of life into the masses of the people is not just the idea of socialism and communism. Anyone who loves the country, the people, and the nation can serve the people and accordingly is a qualified member of the masses of the people. And so we can also think of this the other way as well, right? And this is especially important in our situation where we have a bloated class, a bloated labor aristocracy that even Lenin could not have predicted. Yeah, very easy to know when people open their mouths. Exactly. And so even people who are from a working class status, as I was saying earlier, they can have a very reactionary outlook and they can serve the reaction because they have been convinced of incorrect worldview, right? And like I say, when we're talking about like an intersectional analysis, I think that this becomes even more important for our current society because, again, many of the members who would be considered in classic Marxist terms as lumpenproletariat or even petty bourgeois from First Nations communities have a far more proletarian and revolutionary outlook than many of, than a lot of settlers who might work in fucking factories in the West. And the reason for that is because of their differing relation to colonialism. And because those people who have a certain relation to colonialism end up being the targets of bribery. You see, when Marx thought about the lumpenproletariat, he thought that the lumpenproletariat, just taking that class as a whole, only considering Europeans, of course, living in a European society, he just says, well, because they're lumpenproletariat, they could easily be bribed. But now here we have a different situation. It's not just that the lumpenproletariat taken as this class as a whole can easily be bribed. It's that proletarians and lumpenproletariats and petty bourgeois who happen to be accepted into the annals of whiteness, they have a whole different situation, a whole different experience, right? And so they ended up being the targets of bribery to become part of the labor aristocracy, to be used as a weapon against actual working class labor movements, which again, ideologically, end up being in the most oppressed communities. Whether or not those people are chronically left out of work, chronically excluded from work as it exists or not. So I think that's important for us to understand. So when we're saying here, so coming back to our little illustration here, when we're talking about people's militant defense of their government can be evidence of the dictatorship of the proletariat, when we're saying this one here, we're talking about not people and not specific the people against it, or like not just talking about people who have been fooled by the bourgeoisie, right? But we're talking about those people who are proletarian, who are worker. Bannon has a good play-by-play on how different lumpen groups sort out depending on who engages with them and how. Wretched of the Earth is fantastic for showing revolution as it takes place. Absolutely. More and more people definitely need to read. And And a lot of where I get what I'm saying about the dictatorship of the proletariat and why I showed you like Kwame Nkrumah's definition is because I tend to try and take that more Juche and Pan-Africanist approach to understanding the dictatorship of the proletariat and the struggle for establishing socialism. And that the dictatorship of the proletariat and the establishment of it is the prelude, the very moment before the socialist system emerges. So does that make sense to everybody? And let's just finish by saying this. Life is not perfect in but the proletariat have a weapon they didn't before. So, and I think this one is important too. Because this is one I think that we need to talk about. And this is one that we need to drive home to liberals. Life is not perfect in the dictatorship of the proletariat. But the proletariat have a weapon they didn't have before. That is, what is the weapon that the proletariat doesn't have before? Before the dictatorship of the proletariat, they are the objects of politics, right? After the dictatorship of the proletariat, they are no longer the objects of politics. That correct, Blatt. Yes, because they have the state turns them into the subject of politics. Meaning they are now the driving force. They go from, in a dictatorship of the proletariat, being the objects of politics to the subject of politics. The driving force of politics. They now manage the class contradictions. Exactly. The new state allows them to manage class contradictions in their favor, right? So the new state allows them to manage class contradictions in their favor. Absolutely. And when will the dictatorship of the proletariat go away? Do we know? Do we remember? There's a certain point at which the dictatorship of the proletariat will go away. And exactly. When class is abolished, when contradictions are solved, that is when the dictatorship of the proletariat can finally go away. Not before then. Before then, of course, you would be just surrendering. Hell yeah. And now, I have one last thing that I want to ask you. And we're gonna just talk about that one last thing very briefly. Because I think this is important. Do you think that, given what I say about this, given what we said earlier about the way in which revolution comes about, the building of dual power, do you think that the dictatorship of the proletariat can then emerge as a peaceful development of capitalist society? Can it grow up within the framework of capitalist society? Not unless we want to get cooped. Depends on if capitalism will willingly surrender its power. And what does our historical experience tell us about capitalism's willingness to surrender? I always do that. Can it arise in parliamentary reform? Has it ever? Can't we just appeal to the bourgeoisie's humanity? You can trust things generally to act in their own interest. Capitalists will act rationally to continue to own and exploit the planet. It appears parliamentary reform is not meant to reform. Right, right. So let me ask you this then. Okay, so it seems like we're saying that it's not possible for socialism or the dictatorship of the proletariat to arise as a reform of capitalist society. Okay, so let me ask you then, how come? How come feudal society or how come feudal society was able to grow up and emerge through reform of the slave system? And then how come capitalism was able to grow up and emerge through reform of the feudal system? And why is that not possible with socialism? What is the difference between all of those other examples of the property relations of capitalism growing up within feudalism and that eventually leading to their revolution? What is the difference between why why can capitalism grow up in feudalism and emerge? Why can feudalism grow up in slave society and emerge? But why not socialism? Not industrialization. Although, I mean, in some ways, like modern science and technology makes necessary socialism, but no, not industrialization. The reason why socialism can't emerge as a peaceful result of capitalism, while the rest of those things could, especially in their property relations, is because all of those other societies, slave society, feudal society, and capitalist society, all have something in common, which socialist society does not have in common with them. Well, those other systems all rely on exploitation. So maybe there were members of the ruling classes who were willing to try different systems of exploitation. Yep, you hit the nail right on the head, Dorian. It's a matter of both of the all of those other systems, even as like as violent as some of the contradiction and the contest between them could have gotten. Really, the property relations of capitalism and the capitalists themselves, in huge numbers, emerged as a peaceful development in feudal society. And in many instances, feudal, like the hangovers of feudal families and stuff, still exist today, right? Because, like, capitalism to a certain degree, the capitalists wrestled state control from them, but at the same time, sort of signaled to them that the class relations, as in a minority of exploiters maintaining a huge number, the majority being exploited, will continue. So in a sense, they are really expressions of the same oppressive system, the same system based on individualism, right? They're all expressions of that same individualist based, class oppression based society. Whereas socialism is, since the emergence of class society, since the emergence of slave societies in those places where they emerged, socialism for the first time is the reemergence of a collectivist based system. Inherently different than all of the individualism that was before it. Which is why the only way the socialist system can emerge is through the destruction of the individualist system. The socialist society and the dictatorship of the proletariat arise on the ruins of the bourgeois society, right? As Comrade Stalin said, through smashing of the bourgeois machine. I got a good Stalin quote here for you. Right here. So, and there's also a Kim Jong Il one I got as well that's sort of like this. But as Stalin says, the dictatorship of the proletariat cannot arise as the result of a peaceful development of bourgeois society and of bourgeois democracy. It can only arise as the result of smashing of the bourgeois state machine, the bourgeois army, the bourgeois bureaucratic apparatus, and the bourgeois police. Let me see if I can find the one from Kim Jong Il as well. There we go. Let's do a couple Kim Jong Il quotes to end off our dictatorship of the proletarian discussion. Just looking for one more. I know there's one more really good one here. Oh, I know another good thing I want to say too. In the party and in the dictatorship of the proletariat, the ruling party, is it acceptable for there to be a plurality of ideology? Or must there be a monolithic ideology? That scary word. Monolith. What do you think? What do you think is more conducive to having proper democracy? Is Venezuela then the exception to this rule, as the PSUV was voted into a bourgeois democracy? I mean, no, because there is still, because even though it's voted in, like, even though it, like, you could say that it was sort of like demonstrated to them that they have mass support in that way. As we saw with the actions of the US, the meddling of the US, the constant attempts of invasion and everything else, it has not been peaceful, right? It has not been a peaceful transition. It's been a very violent transition. Even though even in their bourgeois parliament, it was even though even in that bourgeois parliament they had majority of votes, you still see all of these attempts at overthrow and attempts at claiming this leadership is not actually legitimate and this other person actually won the election, so on and so forth, right? And then type of violence and invasions and attempted coups that go along with that is all evidence of it not being a peaceful transition. Yes, please, I would love to see Maduro fistfight Elon. That would be great. Here we go. No, that's still not the one I was looking for. Bothering me that I can't find this one thing that I really wanted. It's a really good quote, and I'll have to take my time and find it, I guess. There's a really good one about exactly that it not being able to grow up. Here we go. Okay, there we go. I got the ones I want. I'm still missing the one that I wanted to show you, but no, we got some good ones here that'll be good to top offer discussion. Oh, and here's the other one about the masses I wanted to say too. Okay, there. We're gonna read these couple Kim Jong Il quotes, sort of, just to top offer discussion here, and then we'll go on to the candy type content. Actually, DPRK travel vlog is first. So I like this one, and I like this one, and I like this one. Okay, so first let's do this one. This is sort of more going into more detail about the thing about the masses I was saying. The subject of history is the working masses, not the reactionary exploiting classes. The working masses carve out and develop history, but the exploiting classes try to arrest and turn back the historical advance. All exploiting classes, after all, constitute a reaction against history. They are the target of revolution. The whole course of the existence of class societies has been a history of stark struggles between the creators of history and the reaction against history, between the masters of revolution and the targets of revolution. That is, between the working masses and the reactionary exploiting classes. Society has advanced and developed through these struggles. And further, in the history of human society, capitalism is the last exploiting system, which trampled upon the masses' aspirations and demand for independence. It is a violently oppressive system which combines class domination with national oppression. It's important to understand capitalism as this combination, by the way. And finally, what is to be done with this knowledge? The revolution can be pushed forward only by the active struggle of the revolutionaries and the popular masses. Fundamentally speaking, a revolution does not always break out when all the necessary conditions exist, nor is it carried out always in favorable circumstances. Waited with folding arms for all conditions to ripen is tantamount to refusing to make a revolution. Primary importance, therefore, should be given to the ideological factor in the revolutionary struggle. And what that means is when we're going out there and building that dual power, when we're feeding our community, and when the way to, like, feeding your community is great. All great things. Feed your community, fill those gaps in the service. However, in order to make it revolutionary work, you need to combine it with your priority being on using that to ideologically train people, to ideologically awaken people. And without doing that, you can think of that kind of work as being charity and not really revolutionary work, right? You have to have that. You need that combination. And it's not just that you don't just do that work just to be able to reach people's minds, but it is an important thing so that they can, because it's like the old saying, you teach a man to fish. Well, you teach people to fish by teaching them to overthrow the system that's parasitic to them. And you do that while offering them fish. Therefore, primary importance, therefore, should be given to the ideological factor in the revolutionary struggle and construction work. And on this basis, strenuous efforts should be made to create all the necessary conditions. And with that in mind, I do think that, yes, that is also our main way in which we can determine a dictatorship of the proletariat, is that ideological factor which guides it. Base it on what they are doing, right? Not just what they are saying. And I think in all the cases, like when we look at Cuba and DPRK, whether it's in the international arena or in the domestic arena, they definitely, without a doubt, beyond a shadow of a doubt, demonstrate that they do have a dictatorship of the proletariat. Whether it's China putting business and whether it's China putting capitalists and bankers where they ought to go when they're committing crimes against the people, Vietnam doing the same thing, or or DPRK. It's all, we see expressions of that. And with DPRK, where their bourgeoisie essentially has been all liquidated, the evidence for that is in the way the state serves the people, the way it provides all the people with healthcare, education, and your healthcare including prescription medicine, eyes, dentist, everything, right? If you're on maternity leave, you can even go and stay at like a nice, what'll be like almost like a hotel room style hospital and get like waited on hand and foot as if you were at like an all-star hospital. But anybody who's pregnant can get that treatment. All of that is evidence of that being a dictatorship of the proletariat in DPRK. And you can fight me, like you can argue against that all you want, but at the end of the day, I think it's a pretty simple comparison when you take DPRK, a country that is the target of embargoes and sanctions and everything else, and like sanctions, embargoes, all these other things that distort their economy, meant to strangle their economy, and still they provide all of these things to these people: healthcare, education, and at every level, not just like healthcare, but not dentist, not this, not that. You gotta pay for your prescription. No. Full-fledged universal healthcare. Full-fledged education system, which includes giving you scholarships to other countries. Like, if in DPRK, if you do good in school, you can go and study in Russia or wherever else, provided that country doesn't ban your entry, right? All of this, combined with those sanctions and embargoes, is evidence of how strict and how strong the dictatorship of the proletariat is there. Whereas you look at the US and Canada and stuff, you see how strong our dictatorship of the bourgeoisie is, because we have healthcare, but it sterilizes First Nations people. Sure, we have healthcare, but there's no dental care. Sure, we have healthcare, but there's no optical care. Sure, we have healthcare, but your prescriptions are not paid for. Sure, we have, you see what I'm saying? Like, so it's not actually comparable. And when you get down to it and start making the actual honest comparisons with yourself, it's undeniable, right? That Canada, with this healthcare but, with this education but, with, privatized universities and all this other shit, it's clear that Canada does not have a dictatorship of the proletariat. And it's clear that DPRK does. And so then what you have to ask yourself is, okay, so then why is it spending all of this money on military equipment? And for that, I invite you to look into the history of the Korean War. And the fact that the war hasn't actually ever ended. So there you go. And we sure as hell don't have muskmelons that cost fucking half a cent. Which is also like how much it costs to like do the public transportation, right? Right here. The suppression of the bourgeois state by the proletarian state is impossible without a violent revolution. The abolition of the proletarian state, i.e., the state in general, is impossible except through the process of withering away. This is a very, very sorry for startling you, Jay. So see, this is very important to understand. The suppression of the bourgeois state by the proletarian state is impossible without a violent revolution. And the abolition of the proletarian state, i.e., the state in general, is impossible except through the process of withering away. And the withering away happens as a result of class antagonisms being solved and class being abolished. So there you go. That's our I think that's a good little. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I've been watching. She's actually reading a book that I suggested to her. The Imperialists Started the Korean War. It's a book published by the DPRK, actually. That was one of Larry's suggestions. But there we go. That is our discussion, I think, on the dictatorship of the proletariat. It is very good, Kay. I'm glad. I'm so glad you're reading it. I read it years and years ago, and it really helped me understand way better. There. Dictatorship of the proletariat. Oh, here, let's put it in people's. The shapes are wild. There. Or no, wait, even better is to do it like this. There. There. The dictatorship of the proletariat is the proletarian state. So what do you think? That was my first attempt at doing a free-form education session about theory. Was this helpful? Is this a segment you'd like to see me continue doing? We can help inform what we're gonna talk about in these sessions based on what we're reading in our study group in the Discord and stuff. But this was my idea. This is just my trial run of what do you think about free-form education about these various topics, and we'll discuss them back and forth in chat like this. I'll ask you questions, get your takes, and then I'll give you what my opinion is. Continue with this? Yes? Loved it? Yes? Great session? This is how I hope to stream. It's so good. Good. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay. Because this is exactly what I've been thinking. I want to replace when I talk about Theory Thursdays from now on, because I want to make use of the study group in Discord. I want this to be our Theory Thursdays. And so I want people to so if you are participating in the study group with us and reading with us, you can help inform what we talk about on this, right? And then if you don't happen to catch our study sessions, my hope is that this will still be informative for you, because what we'll be doing is putting these topics, like the dictatorship of the proletariat, into plain language and just having a back and forth discussion about it. And so anyone who's not in our study group will still hopefully be able to learn from what we're learning about in the study group. So yeah, I'm super glad that you all like it. We're going to keep doing it like this with this same paint program, and like a classroom type thing where I'm asking you questions and just trying to get your answers, trying to get your feedback, and then giving you my take on it all. Awesome. I'm glad you liked it. Thank you, comrades. That makes me happy. I won't play any shower scenes. No. Right. I'll save that for next stream. Hey. Welcome, new chatter. M's Rice? Welcome. Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. So this is our new idea. This will be at least Thursdays from now on, okay? Thursdays freeform theory learning from now on. And now what we can do, we'll go boop boop boop. And watch how cool it is when we end it too. When we go to end our freeform study session, we go shut down the computer. Ba-bum, there we go.